So, yeah, let me just start with an introduction. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. What I'd like to do today is move beyond the usual headlines and yeah, take a step back to look at how the relationship between Russia and Europe has evolved over time, starting basically at the Cold War and then ending up where we are today. Um, and the main thing I'm really interested in is how that is experienced from your side, because I think the Russian perspective doesn't get enough attention. Most of the mainstream media doesn't address this or doesn't want to address it. And I think this conversation needs to be about understanding. Um, the Russian perspective is not always fully represented in the normal media, in the Western media, and it is an important part of the broader picture. And this conversation is going to be about understanding mostly. So yeah, let's get started. Could you perhaps tell me a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. For me, it's an interesting experience. I don't have, regrettably, many occasions to speak to the Dutch public, taking into account the present political circumstances.
Right.
So I really appreciate any opportunity to bring to the attention of the Dutch people our position, our vision of the events. And today, yes, I will not only express our official position, but also my personal experience, my personal vision. I'm already an elderly man. I live a long life and had a long diplomatic career, so
Right.
I will be quite glad to share with you some of my opinions
Excellent.
on different issues. Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I'm looking. Could you maybe move a little bit closer to the microphone? Yeah, fantastic. So where did you grow up? What basically led up to this point? How did you get into diplomacy?
Well, I was born in Moscow in 1975.
Yeah.
Oh, in 1957, rather 57. It's a bit difference. Yeah, and I'm a hereditary Muscovite. I joined the primary school, then the secondary school in Moscow. Then I graduated from school. I joined Moscow State Institute of International Relations. It's now university.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rather prestigious educational institution that trains specialists in international relations,
Right.
including diplomats. After graduation, I entered foreign ministry, foreign service. It was in 1979,
Right.
and since then, for already about 47 years, I have been serving in the foreign ministry in different positions, from attaché to ambassador.
Right.
Yeah, I spent quite a lot of my career in Africa. I was in Sierra Leone and Ghana. I was ambassador to Gabon. I spent more than 15 years in the legal service of the foreign ministry. I was legal advisor of the Russian mission to the United Nations.
Right.
And then I was director of a couple of departments. My last position before I came here to the Netherlands was director of the department on new challenges and threats. That's a rather poetic name, but in reality that's the department that is dealing with international cooperation in the fight against the terrorism, narcotic drugs, organized
Right.
crime, piracy, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, and
Right.
then in 2024, in January 2024, I came here as ambassador of the Russian Federation.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for the very broad perspective you just
Mm.
gave us. If you look back at your youth in Russia and the perspective you had of the West back then, does that actually line up with reality? I mean, obviously you've traveled the world. Does the perspective that we have in the West actually align with how life is in Russia?
Well, I would certainly say that no, the Western perspective of the life both in the Soviet Union in last days and now in Russia are not adequate, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and what we read, what we see here in the media about the life in Russia are very far from being real, you know,
Right.
far from reality.
Do you think that's done on purpose, or is that just a misunderstanding because people don't know exactly
I
what's...
think both. It's certainly there is a lot of propaganda. What we read in the Dutch press mostly is propaganda, you know. And even the reporters that are reporting from Moscow, they see what's happening, but they are
Right.
obliged to give the picture that is in line with the present day policy
Hmm.
of the establishment. But yes, also I see that there have always been a kind of a misunderstanding of the Russian mentality, of the Russian way of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are Europeans, yes, both Europeans and certainly there is a great part of Russia in Asia, but we have a bit different mentality from the Western Europe.
Right. If in the West, the Soviet Union was often seen as closed, very restrictive, and people weren't allowed to speak their mind. Is that an accurate description of how the Soviet Union was, or do you think that's also not quite accurate?
You know, yeah, the perception of the Soviet Union in the West was and still is as a kind of a gloomy, undemocratic society where people are suppressed, where there is no
Exactly.
freedom of speech, etc., etc. That's, I would say, not a correct picture. Yeah, Soviet Union certainly was not a democratic state from the point of view of the standards of Western democracy.
Right.
Yeah, there was there was a rule of the Communist Party. You cannot criticize the Communist Party, communist ideology.
Hmm.
There were no just multi-party elections. But at the same time, you know, people in the Soviet Union enjoyed high quality of social security.
Right.
There was free education for everyone and high standard education. Now it is universally acknowledged that education in the Soviet Union was one of the best in the world. There were free medical care, decent medical care. There was no unemployment. The accommodation for everyone was provided by state. There were no homeless people.
Hmm.
People were absolutely sure of their future because you know they had their career and then after retirement they had their pension that was modest, but quite enough to have a decent life. You know.
So the state would basically provide for everything.
Yeah. That's the other side of the medal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, Soviet Union was not absolutely closed to the world. Yeah, I think all the best examples of the world literature were translated, were published.
Hmm.
The best movies were shown. You know,
Right.
there were great exchange in arts, in culture. Yeah, so that's the portrait of the Soviet Union. Now, you know, in the society, especially in the elderly segments of the society,
Right.
there is a nostalgia
Yeah, for the old days.
for
It,
the old days. Yeah,
it's funny that you mentioned that because nowadays in Holland as well, there's a large portion of the Dutch population that also longs for how things were 30 years ago.
yeah.
Because a lot of people feel that we've basically gone in the wrong direction with the mass migration and things like that. And a lot of people are saying, okay, maybe we should let that go and go back to the old ways. Maybe that's a better approach and also a more social approach because you then focus on your own people and not try to provide for everybody. But that's a discussion for another time. when you were growing up, what kind of perspective did you have of the West, and how has that changed since you've now traveled the world?
Well, certainly in the Soviet official propaganda, the West was also portrayed as a space where just transnational corporations exploited ordinary people, etc., etc., etc. That was also certainly not completely true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is always very good aspects of life in every society,
Right.
not that good, but we were always much more open to the world, that the world was open to Russia, to the Soviet Union.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember from back in the day is that people would say the Russians can be here at any time. So there was like a constant threat from the Russian Empire. And as a child, you don't question that, but now that I'm older and you reflect on that, you realize that that has never been the case. That was just basically propaganda made to basically, provide for the military to have enough funding and stuff like that. And I can see now a return of that, but we'll get to that later. Let me first jump to 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I'm sure you remember that. I vividly remember being glued to the TV screen in 1989 and seeing actually people chipping away with hammers at the wall, trying to tear it down. What did that moment feel like from from inside the Soviet Union? Because obviously, Berlin has been a point of discussion for a long time with the wall and everything.
Well, in the Soviet Union, I think these processes were received with quite an approval, because that was already 1999. The Perestroika and glasnost was on its way. 89, yeah.
Yeah, 89, yeah.
89, yeah. And but I would stress one moment, that the fall of the Berlin Wall, the unification of Germany, was absolutely a result of a goodwill of the Soviet Union.
Right.
Without the goodwill of the Soviet Union, it would never happen. Just it would take years and years and years for this process to be just realized and accomplished.
Right.
Yeah, and regrettably, Germans they either forgot about it, or are trying to forget, or pretend to forget.
Right.
Yeah. They must manifest a bit different approach to it. Yeah.
Right. So what you're basically saying is you didn't have the impression that things were falling apart. It felt more like, okay, we're allowing this to happen, and
Well,
this is more
no,
progress.
with the reunification of Germany, no, we didn't have any strong feelings about it. Yeah. The problem that how it was all exercised, then for instance the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Germany was not exercised in a proper way, but that's a bit different story. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Can you remember how you felt back then? Did you feel hope, or did you feel despair? Did you feel anything when you saw the wall fall down? What did it do to you as a person?
Well, no, the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was just a case more or less for the Germans, for the Europeans. For us, more important were the processes that happened in the Soviet Union.
Right.
Yeah, and that was certainly a very difficult period for us. When we now reflect on the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's a very complicated process, very complicated phenomena. There is not a single opinion among the historians, among the political analysis, analytics, about why it happened, how it happened.
Yeah. Obviously, that started with President Gorbachev basically having the whole Perestroika movement. Was that basically the onset of the fall of the Soviet Union, or were there other factors into play that?
Well, first of all, if we speak about so-called perestroika and glasnost, yeah, that was the policy introduced by Gorbachev, the dismantling of the Soviet model economy, planned economy, introduction of the market approaches. Yes, perhaps the idea was very good, yeah, because yes, the market, the planned economy didn't prove to be effective, yeah, at that time. Certainly,
Right.
it was rather effective and perhaps necessary during the wartime. Thanks to it, we won the Second World War. But at the time of the 80s, yeah, the economy was a bit, proving to be not effective. It was in stagnation, and certainly reforms were really needed.
Hmm.
But the way they were executed,
Yeah.
it was absolutely wrong. It was there was no not a roadmap, a kind of a plan.
Right.
It was just everything was demolished and nothing was constructed.
Yeah.
And the only slogan that was the market will regulate everything. But that was absolutely not true. So it brought enormous difficulties to the economy. The economy was ruined.
Yeah. You
Ruined.
you
I experienced it. That was.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you mentioned the key
Yeah,
point.
yeah. As to the communist ideology, yeah, perhaps it was also doomed. The collapse of the communist ideology was perhaps inevitable.
Hmm.
Yeah, because well, people didn't in reality believe in this just
Maybe.
ideals. Yeah.
Yeah. When I look at it, and you just mentioned it, the main thing is that maybe it was rushed too fast. Maybe it should have taken 10 years, maybe 15, to slowly make a plan and then execute that plan in order for the Soviet Union to also join more of a global movement. Because one of the things that I think went wrong in the 90s is that the Soviet Union, or actually the Russian Federation at that point, because that was after the collapse, they sought to have a more beneficial cooperation with the US, with Europe, maybe as a provider of energy and minerals and stuff like that. So President Putin himself actually went to the US and had a talk with President Bush at that time. And that never really materialized into the Russian Federation and Europe and the US kind of coming together and making really an alliance where they could benefit from each other. Do you think that might have something to do with that as well?
Yeah, first of all, I would like also to observe that yes, the end of the communist rule was inevitable. The end of the planned economy, yes, it was also something that we did need. But the collapse of the Soviet Union as a state was not inevitable.
Right.
It could be easily just solved all these problems within one state. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a combination of objective and subjective factors.
Right.
Among the objective factors were, yes, the economic difficulties, the dismantling of planned economy, the just collapse of the ideology that was a kind of a just united segment.
Right.
Yeah, uniting segment. But there were also subjective elements. That's the the nationalistic aspirations of the national elites in the former Soviet republics, their lust for power,
Right.
and was not only in the republics, it was also in Russia, in Moscow. Yeah, and that combination just ended in the collapse of the Soviet Union, dismantling of the Soviet Union, which, in my personal opinion, is a great tragedy.
Right.
It's a great tragedy, because it brought enormous difficulties, sufferings, not only to Russia, but also to other republics, former republics. And we
Right.
see even now the consequences. As to your question about the West, yeah, one of the aspects, just this Gorbachev policy had, I think, three aspects. One is Perestroika, restructuring of the economy. The second is glasnost, opening
Right. Yeah.
of the society, and the third one was new political thinking.
Right.
That we didn't see anymore the West as our enemy. Yeah, we were open to the West.
Is that basically the
And that was perhaps one of our very naive
right?
and
Was that also because maybe people,
fatal mistakes, because we were open to the West.
yeah? Was that
The
also
West was never open to us, you
No.
know.
I was just getting to that. Was
Yeah.
that maybe because there was a feeling of hope? Okay, the Cold War is over. We can now move towards each other and see whether we can cooperate on things. Is that
That's how we felt, you know.
Yeah.
But as far as I understand, the West felt differently. The West believed that the Cold War is over. The Soviet Union, now Russia, is a loser, and as a loser, it must subdue
right?
to the Western interests. It doesn't have a right to have its own national interests, not only within the country but in adjacent areas in the
Right.
in the former Soviet republics. Yeah, and it must just only serve as a supplier of natural resources, etc., etc. You know.
Right.
That was also the mistake of the West, because it's our national character. We never subdue to any external dominance. You know, it's impossible for the just millennium history of Russia. That was never the case.
But I think that's the same for most nationalities. People
Yeah.
don't want to be subdued to
Yeah.
whatever.
There are some European countries, European nations, I will not mention them, that are easily, first they subdued to the Soviet dominance, now they subdue to the dominance of
The EU, yeah.
of NATO, of European Union.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not the case with Russia.
Right. You just mentioned that obviously you and I are both old enough to have witnessed this firsthand. I remember it feeling as a period of hope, because I thought, okay, now we're seeing a new Russia with the Perestroika and the glasnost and everything. The country is opening up. We're seeing a different side of Russia, also a side of Russia which we weren't familiar with, because the evil empire that we were told that the Russian former Soviet Union was appeared to not exist. That has turned out to be a fairy tale. Obviously, there are some things that are true, but the general idea of an empire that's just hell-bent on conquering all of Europe, that turned out to be false. So we're now having a new, fresh look on Russia, and I think that sense of hope was shared with most Europeans. People thought, okay, we're now moving into a new direction. We're going to cooperate with everybody. Was there a similar feeling in Russia? Were you guys hopeful for that as well?
Yes, we did. People in general were hopeful as far as the West is concerned. We believed that we could become a member of the family of European countries, an equal member
Right.
of the family, with our national interests being respected, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and that was our hope, but regrettably the reality didn't was so bright, so good, because yes, the 90s was an extremely difficult period for us.
Right.
Yeah, dismantling of the Soviet economy. Well,
How did it feel for like a common Russian? I mean, you see the Soviet Union, where you grew up in, basically fall apart, and there's this unstable situation where you don't know where things are going. There's the West that's at least from the Western civilian point of view is hopeful. We can have long-lasting peace and we can cooperate together. How did a common Russian family experience this?
well, for the common Russian family, 90s were an extremely difficult period, you know, because well, the democracy that was introduced, so-called democracy,
Right.
was to a great extent compromised in Russia, you know. These democratic forces that came to power,
Yeah.
they, frankly speaking, in the 90s, they didn't serve the interests of the people, of the ordinary people. There was this extremely cruel privatization with the that ended in a huge gap, you know, in the standard of living. There were millionaires, billionaires that emerged immediately, you know.
Are those still the same oligarchs that we have today?
And there were some of them, yes, some of them are really some of them. There are certainly there are quite a new generation of economic players in Russia that really earned their money by just honest economic operations. But at that period, yeah, this initial accommodation of capital, as Karl Marx put it, you know, that was in the 19th century in the United States and in Europe, certainly in England, when some people became extremely rich, and the others, the majority, by the way, lost all their incomes, all their property. You know,
and I think a lot of people don't understand what that kind of impact that should have had on the perspective Russian people also have on the West, because what Europe could also have done is lend a helping hand. I mean, during the Second World War, there were programs set up to help nations rebuild. Europe could also have lent a hand and said,
yeah,
okay,
but Europe didn't help us in reality, you know. In the 90s, the assistance of the West was just, I would say, more of an advice, you know.
right.
Yeah, there were no any real programs of assistance, and at the same time, from the very beginning, the West started to undermine, you know, the society by instigating nationalistic feelings. You know, we all remember that West supported these terrorists and rebels in Chechnya.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't. I mean, in the West, you didn't call them terrorists as they were. They called them rebels, you know, rebels. Yeah, and when we started this operation, I remember we were very much criticized. They say, "How come you are saying that you are fighting with terrorists, but you are fighting with tanks, artillery, aviation? It must be a police operation." 3 years later, when the United States started the same operation in Afghanistan, it was okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a war against terrorism.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but these things are always viewed differently
Yeah.
depending on who
It's,
starts.
these are double standards,
Yeah.
you know.
If you look at the younger generations, people in their 20s and 30s, how do they view the period you and I lived through, the 90s? How do they view that period? Do they see it as a moment of opportunity, or do they think we should have stuck with the Soviet Union as it was? How do they view
No, I
that?
don't. For the younger generation, they didn't live in the Soviet Union.
Mhm.
For them, it's a history. You know, they cannot just. They do not have any nostalgia. Certainly, they believe that, and it's absolutely right, that they must live according to the present day circumstances. They must face this
Right.
reality and accommodate to it, and that's how the life is going on.
But they don't have like more conservative feelings towards, okay, maybe we should go back to what the Soviet Union was.
No, I don't think that in the Russian society there is any desire to go back to the Soviet period, to reinstate communist party rule and to return to planned economy. No, no, no. We want to live in a modern society according to all the world standards. You know, that's what we are doing now.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room for a second, NATO. One of the things that I remember back in the day, and some of this is discussed and disputed at several levels, what I remember from back in the 90s is that there were not written but spoken agreements about the expansion of NATO towards Russia. Basically, moving weaponry, rocket installations, stuff like that towards the Russian border. How has that affected your perspective on the relationship between then the Russian Federation and Europe, or more specifically NATO?
Okay, so first of all, let's remember how and why the NATO was established. It was established in the 40s
Right.
to fight against the Soviet Union as a military bloc. Then there was Warsaw Pact. There were two military pacts just
Right.
starting against each other.
Yeah, basically the Cold War
standing
scenario.
it's Cold War scenario. When the Soviet Union ceased to exist, and the Warsaw Pact was not also in reality, what was the reason for NATO's existence? You know, what was to fight against whom?
Well,
To fight against whom?
they obviously perceived the Russian Federation as or
So-
Soviet
so-
Union at that point as a threat.
Yeah, but when there was no Soviet Union, there was Russian Federation, and we just discussed it. There was a mutual feeling that we are no longer enemies. Yeah.
Right.
So what's the reason of NATO's existence, and what's the reason of its enlargement eastwards towards the
Russian border.
territory of the Russian Federation?
Yeah.
Yeah, from the very beginning, yeah, we were against it very, very, very strongly. And you know, yes, when there was the dismantling of the Berlin Wall, and then later the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Germany, we were given assurances on all levels that
That's what I remember.
there will be no enlargement of NATO.
Right.
And even the former politicians like Baker, like Helmut Kohl, yeah, they acknowledged it, that they assured President Yeltsin, first Gorbachev, then Yeltsin, that there will no enlargement. In reality, that was quite an opposite.
Right.
Quite an opposite.
Right.
Yeah. So for us, it was a signal that the West still had aggressive plans against Russia.
Right.
Otherwise, you cannot justify the existence of a military bloc, you know, aggressive military bloc.
Right. Yeah, and the argument that they use is to defend against the threat from Russia, and I think you've just explained that Russia, as a society, is very well versed to basically take care of itself.
Russia was not a threat, and this is still not a threat. You know.
Well, that's one of the things that I came to realize after. I mean, I lived through my childhood basically with being taught that you should fear Russia. Russia is an evil empire and everything, and they're willing to take over Europe. But when you get a little older, you realize, okay, Russia is such a vast country, has so much resources. Why would they want to bother with taking over a few countries in Europe when there's nothing in there for them? There's no resources that they don't have themselves, for example.
No.
So why would you bother doing that?
That's what we are saying every day. We have neither desire nor capability
Right.
to attack Europe, to attack NATO.
Right.
And at the same time, what we hear every day, that Russia is going to attack us. We must prepare. We must go to war with Russia. And even a year is mentioned now, 2030.
Yeah.
In 2030, there will be a war between Russia and NATO. And the Dutch politicians, they even say that one of the most important targets of Russia will be the Netherlands. You know, it's crazy because, you know, why?
Yeah, well, that's
what is the reason, you know?
That's the thing that I keep coming back to as well. Why? What's the gain for Russia?
You know, and
what,
you know, one more aspect that is, I think, the politicians here that are speaking about the future war, they, I don't know, I believe they understand. They must understand
of course,
that the war between Russia and Europe, Russia and NATO, perhaps it will start as a conventional war, but inevitably it will be transformed into a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And that will be the end of Europe.
Yeah, the end of the world, basically.
Yeah, the end of Europe for sure. Yeah, the United States are far. Russia has far east regions, but for Europe it will be over. Yeah.
Right.
And that must be, we don't want this, you know, frankly.
Yeah. Let's skip ahead to the Ukraine in 2013, because I think the fuse was lit at that moment. In 2013, obviously, Ukraine wanted to be independent, and this whole movement started. And then at some point...
you mean in 1990, yeah?
No, I'm talking about 2013.
2030, it's future.
Yeah, when the Ukraine said, okay, we want to be a separate from the Russian Federation, and the whole independent process started. There were European Europarlamentaries actually in Maidan Square in Kiev actually saying, okay, Ukraine, we support you. And I can understand from a Russian perspective that would have been perceived as a threat, or at least you would frown upon that, having representatives of the EU basically saying, okay, we support Ukraine in their fight against Russia. How did you view that moment? How did that?
First of all, what I must say that Russia and Ukraine are two brotherly nations.
Right.
In fact, we are one people. Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, these are branches of the big Russian family.
Right.
We speak one language. Ukrainians between themselves, they still speak Russian because they think Russian, they have Russian mentality, you know. Yeah, okay, it happened so that in 1991, when the Soviet Union was dismantled, Ukraine became an independent country.
Right.
You know, just frankly speaking, it was rather, for me, it was a shock because I never did just saw them, Ukrainians, as foreigners, like Belarusians, like Kazakhstan, but that happened, okay. You know, and at the same time, yeah, there were always some nationalistic feelings in Ukraine. They were not strong. They were minor,
Hmm.
mainly in the western part of the country. As to the eastern part, Donbass, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, they were always Russian.
Right.
Yeah. But the West started to instigate these nationalistic feelings. It was, the process went on in spite of the fact that during the whole 90s and mainly the first decade of the 2000, Ukrainians mainly lived at the expense of Russia,
Right.
In spite of all these political concerns, we supplied them with gas, with oil, with financing, etc. Yeah, they couldn't survive without the help of Russia. But
Right. Wasn't Ukraine also supplying most of the grain to the rest of Russia? Basically, to bake bread and all kinds of other.
oh, that's a fairy tale. Yeah, they produced a lot of grain, like the rest parts of Russia, but it was a common economic space.
Hmm.
You didn't this is Ukrainian grain. This is Russian grain.
Right.
It was Soviet grain.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was one single economic space.
Right.
Yeah. And but by the end of the first decade of the years 2000, these nationalistic feelings in Ukraine became stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. This was this Orange Revolution.
Right.
And then when the pro-Russian president won, the results were declared invalid, and there was a new ballot that was absolutely unconstitutional.
Right.
And what was most important for us, was what is most painful for us, that the Ukraine proclaimed its intention to join NATO.
Yes.
That was absolutely unacceptable. It's 200 kilometers from Moscow, and the NATO missiles there were unacceptable.
So it's not so much about the economics. It's not about the grain. It's not about stuff like that. It's more about the strategic.
Yeah, but at the same time, what happened in 2013, I think, when the West put kind of a dilemma before the Ukraine. You are either with us or against Russia,
Right.
or you are with Russia or against us. There was no third choice,
Right. It's either side.
Either side. You must take side. Yeah. And when then President Yanukovych chose to join this Eurasian Economic Society, that was much more advantageous for Ukraine from the economic point of view than to adhere to some very vague, promises from the European Union,
Right.
that are still very vague, as far as the membership in the European Union is concerned. Then he was ousted. There was coup d'etat. Absolutely coup d'etat. We must name.
I remember.
He was given guarantees by France, I think, Poland, and Germany. The next day he was ousted. And we might have different feelings about, or opinions about, his personality. But he was a legitimate president, elected by his people. And then extremely nationalistic forces came to power. They immediately started to ban the Russian language, to ban the Russian culture.
Right.
They proclaimed themselves to be something extremely different from Russia. So it was, this project, as we call it now, it was anti-Russia. Not Ukraine, but anti-Russia.
Right.
And then certainly the people of Donbass, Lugansk, certainly Crimea, they didn't agree to it because they felt themselves as Russian.
Right.
They stood against it.
Right.
What happened then?
Yeah.
They were crushed, suppressed, you know.
I've actually been to the Ukraine a few times. I remember being there in 2016, and I also brought this subject up. And there were a lot of mixed feelings. Some people you spoke with were very on the Russian side. Other people were more on the Ukrainian side. So it seems like there's also a divide in the society itself, where like
Ukraine society is divided, and the central part, the eastern part, they have always been pro-Russian. Yeah, the western part is a bit different. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So let's address the current situation then, the war in Ukraine. Russia describes this conflict as a special military operation. Could you maybe explain again for our listeners and our viewers what does that mean?
Well, you know, we started this operation in 2022, but in fact the war in Ukraine, as I have already mentioned, started in 2014,
Mm-hmm.
when the brutal suppression of Donbass, Lugansk, and other parts of the eastern Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah, there were just no one now mentions, but more than 12,000 civilians were killed there, you know, by the Ukrainian forces during this so-called anti-terrorist operation. And by 2022, it became absolutely clear that the Ukrainian forces are going to crush brutally Donbass and Lugansk, and then they also proclaimed their just desire to go further, to go to Rostov and Krasnodar regions of Russia.
Right.
But you know, until the very last moment, we tried to avoid it. You probably remember that in December 2021, we sent high-ranking envoys to Washington,
Mm-hmm.
to Brussels, with the draft treaty
Right.
on mutual security.
Right.
You know, and if this treaty would be accepted, then there would be no operation. And by the way, if the Minsk agreements in 2015
Yeah.
were implemented, there would be no war
Right.
at all. Yeah,
Right.
but former president of France Hollande and former chancellor of Germany Merkel, they rather cynically acknowledged that they were never prepared to implement these Minsk agreements.
Right.
It was a kind of a time-gaining
Right.
exercise, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
to strengthen Ukraine, to accommodate forces, to just build military machine, just to gain some time. So until the very last moment, we tried to avoid it. It was not our choice, frankly speaking, you know. But what are the goals? They were just outlined by our president many times, and they are still valid. First of all, that's the neutral and non-aligned status of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Then the status of the Russian language as an official language, because this language that is spoken there. Then the ban on all Nazi ideology, because we know that Nazi ideology is flourishing now. All these battalions, they have their Nazi insignia, they proclaim their superiority over others, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, this thing I think is very much played down in Western media. The whole
Yeah, it is not mentioned, you know.
No.
Yeah. And that certainly now we insist that the territorial realities are to be observed, because in 4 territories in Donbass, Lugansk, People's Republics, as well as Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, there were referendums, and people there expressed their will to be with Russia.
Right.
I'm not speaking about Ukraine. It's absolutely clear. It's even not to be discussed. Ukraine is or Crimea is Russia. Yeah. So these are our basic demands, and you know,
Right.
yeah. As time goes by, the conditions for Ukraine will become worse and worse. You know.
If you look back at 2014, when the EU has basically pledged support for Ukraine, and there was also talk about Ukraine maybe becoming part of NATO, did that influence the decision to do the special military operation in 2022?
Yeah, certainly. The Western policies, they always instigated these anti-Russian feelings in Ukraine, and there was a project, and it is still a project. It's
Right.
a Western project to make Ukraine an anti-Russia. You know, just a kind of powerful leverage. You know, to exert pressure on Russia.
Right.
Yeah.
If you then take a step back to the 1990s, when there was hope of cooperation and everything, and then basically the EU and NATO didn't follow through, doesn't this look like a similar situation where the EU and NATO is again not lending a hand in saying to Russia, okay, let's talk, let's see if we can come together?
Yeah.
It seems to me as if I mean, I'm not putting any blame here, but I'm just trying to observe what's going on from the outside. It seems as if the EU itself has also not made enough effort to prevent this from happening.
Well, I must say that from our point of view, European Union and NATO are playing a very negative role now in this process of or these efforts to find a political solution. You know. Well, while the United States are at least saying that they want to facilitate peace, and they are doing something in this direction,
Right.
the Europeans are playing quite an opposite role. You know, they are rendering enormous military aid to Ukraine. They are instigating all kind of anti-Russian processes there, you know.
Yeah, and propaganda. Because
propaganda, huge propaganda, you know, enormous propaganda, anti-Russian propaganda.
Because the thing that reminds me of the 1980s is we get the same talking points.
Yeah,
the Russians are almost on the border.
Yeah, Russians are on the threshold. Yeah, Russians are coming. Yeah,
it's the same story.
The same story. Though you know, just in the 1980s, 1970s, it was a bit different, because there we had almost 19,000 tanks on the border with NATO.
Right.
Now we don't have anything just to attack, and we don't have this desire.
No.
We don't have this need. You know, our intention, real intention, is to live with Europe as good neighbors. Certainly, we must not love each other anymore. But we must be kind of a civilized members, you know.
Now, you are a diplomat, and I would like to pick your brain about something. What does the European diplomat not understand about Russia? What's the thing that kind of screws things up every time? What's the disconnect there? Why do you guys don't get together, talk about things, sign up, draft up a treaty and sign it. What's
Well, we were ready to do so.
mhm.
Now, what we have now, we have absolutely lack of any dialogue.
Right?
Any dialogue.
So there's no direct line of communication.
Absolutely no. With the United States, we have this
Right.
dialogue. With Europe, no, we don't have. They don't want to hear us. For instance, I am an ambassador here, and I don't have any political contacts with the foreign ministry.
Okay, that's
We
true.
discussed only some practical issues concerning the functioning of the embassy here
Mhm.
in The Hague or the Dutch embassy in Moscow, some security issues of the embassy. We do not discuss any political issues.
Okay.
When I had a couple of opportunities to do so, I expressed my points of view. My interlocutor said, "Okay, we know your position. We are not interested." And then they read out the same as we read every day in
Mhm.
the press, etc., about aggressive plans of Russia. All our arguments are immediately dismissed as propaganda.
Right.
That's not the way to do business. You cannot
No.
find a solution.
No. Well, one of the reasons that I obviously invited you
Yeah.
here is because I want to get your point across. To
You
get
know,
your,
we still believe, we always believed, and that was our approach, that the security is undivisible.
Mhm.
You cannot build your own security at the expense of the others.
Yeah. No, I agree.
If you feel yourself secure, but the other side
right.
doesn't feel so,
Yeah.
that's not security.
Right.
Yeah.
If you
And
look,
when NATO is at our borders, we don't feel secure.
no.
And that's we have to take our just reciprocal steps in this direction.
Yeah, I understand. I can
Yeah.
see it from your perspective. Um, if you had to pick a point in the last 30 years where there was a real breakdown in trust between Russia and Europe or even the US, is there a specific point you can remember where you thought, hey, this is not going in the right direction?
Well, if we take this post-Cold War period, there were a number of cases when our opinion was absolutely disregarded,
Hmm.
and we felt as we were deceived. First of all, we already discussed the enlargement of NATO. Then there was this aggression against Yugoslavia. Then there was aggression against Iraq.
Hmm.
Then there was absolute unprovoked military action against Libya that brought enormous problems to the whole African region. It didn't bring a single aspect of security there.
I think the opinion right now is that we should have probably left Gaddafi in his place, and then things would have
Yeah,
been better.
he didn't pose any threat to anyone. Yeah. It was up to his people to decide whether he was good or bad for them. Yeah. Then and certainly the whole story with Ukraine.
That was really a turning point where Russia
Yeah.
realized, okay, this.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about the sanctions, because obviously the EU and the US as well has posed sanctions on Russia. I've seen videos on YouTube from people walking around in Russian shopping malls, and I see basically everything is there. There's no shortage of anything. How do these sanctions really affect Russia at this point?
Well, I would not be frank and fair with you if I say that sanctions do not affect us completely. Yeah, they do. The banking sector, the exporters, we have certain difficulties certainly
Right.
in this. We cannot directly and easily import some items that we need. But you know, it's we managed to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
For the ordinary Russian, well, they do not feel any evil from sanctions because the shops are full of goods.
Right.
You can find everything in Moscow. You know, even these food, the items that are officially under sanctions. You
Right.
know, if you don't find them in a store, you can order them by internet. You know,
Right, yeah.
so for ordinary people, yeah, there are certainly inconveniences for those who travel.
Right.
If you go to Europe, you cannot use your credit card. You know, our national credit card is not valid here,
Mm-hmm.
and European cards are not valid in Russia. These
Right,
are
okay.
inconveniences.
Yeah.
There is no direct flights now. It took 3 hours to travel from Amsterdam to Moscow.
There's no direct flights? I didn't know that.
No.
Okay.
Now we have go through Istanbul or through Emirates. Now Emirates are not available anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a indirect flight. You know, just
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as I understand,
Mhm.
I mean, Russia is mostly self-proficient in terms of
Yeah. But at the same time, you know, the sanctions did us good because it prompted the development of our own production. Soviet Union was more or less self-sufficient. It produced everything it needed, you know,
Right.
and certainly the basis is still there.
Right.
But yes, when we had these petrodollars, yeah, a lot of foreign currency income, it was perhaps easily just to buy than to produce. It
Right.
was more feasible.
Yeah, so what you're effectively saying is that one of the benefits of the sanctions was that the Soviet Union learned again to take care of itself.
Yes,
It didn't
Russia,
realize-
Russia,
Yeah.
yes, Russia,
Yeah,
yes,
sorry,
yes,
Russia, yeah.
yes. We learned to
Yeah.
take care. We are now reviving our aircraft industry. You
Mhm.
know, we start or have started to to build our own planes,
Right.
civil aviation. Yeah, our own cars, you know, just our own machines. That's it, you know.
Right.
And even in the field of electronics, yeah, when we were a bit just behind the world standards, we are now coping with them. You
Right.
know, it's rather rapidly advancing this sphere. So we must be thankful at the same time.
That's
Yeah.
a positive effect, I think,
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
sanctions.
But for the ordinary people, they don't care about the sanctions.
I was just going to ask, how does the ordinary Russian feel about the sanctions? Do they care? Do they see it as something negative, or maybe do they?
Yes,
see
they see as negative, certainly.
Yeah.
When they confront with, for instance, they cannot just easily go for vacation to Cyprus or to Greece,
Right.
or to Spain. They were very popular destinations. Yeah. And now it's more difficult. Yes, they grudge, but that's not. But for the economy, yes, certainly it's painful. It's painful, I would say. I would not tell that it's something that we do not at all feel. Yeah,
Right,
yeah. For the financial sector, for banking sector, but we manage. You know,
Right.
we manage.
But does
It will not affect. It will not make us abandon our course. You know.
Right. Yeah. If you look at the whole conflict, does Russia see it as a conflict, or more like a proxy conflict from the West against Russia, or do they view it as a conflict from the Ukraine versus Russia?
No, it's a conflict from the West.
From the West.
From the West. Ukraine is a tool. Ukraine is not an subject of the process, but more an object, you
Right.
know. And certainly without the support of enormous support of the West, Ukraine will not survive for 2 weeks, you know.
Hmm.
And yes, we see that when we speak whether we are at war with the West or not.
Yeah.
Yes, we legally no. We have diplomatic relations. I am here in
Right,
in the Hague. The Dutch ambassador is in Moscow, but we understand that there is the Ukrainians are fighting against us with
With the support.
Western weapons,
Right. And one of the things.
with Western intelligence, with Western advisors.
Mhm.
You know, so it's a kind of a proxy war, yeah.
But also, I've seen reports of Western mercenaries actually fighting for Ukraine.
Yeah, a lot of them,
Yeah.
a lot of them.
And
There
one-
were reports, by the way, I don't know whether they are true or not, but there were reports in the local media, in the Dutch media, the Dutch
Yeah.
Dutch pilots are operating the F-16
I don't think that's
planes.
the problem with that.
I
Is,
don't know whether
No, the problem with that is it needs approval of the Dutch government.
I will not comment on it.
So
no.
I doubt that, but hey, who knows?
But it was Dutch press that published it, not Russian.
Yeah, they're just sensationalizing something.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. One of the things that I wonder about often is you see, for example, the U.S. okay the use of specific weapons in Ukraine, and that starts with something simple, and it gradually becomes worse and worse, and at some point, the U.S. actually said, okay, you can use cruise missiles. And I'm sitting here as a normal civilian, and I see this happen in front of me, and I'm like, okay, guys, we're moving in the wrong direction. We want to de-escalate, not escalate.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's an escalation. It's an escalation. Yeah, the further we go, the more dangerous it becomes. You know, there were so-called red lines. You know that these red lines were crossed many times already. Yeah. We do not want. You know, the situation to go beyond any control, you know, and
Right.
just we try to exercise restraint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why when when we know that there is a huge military supply, for instance, going from some neighboring European countries, we know about it. Yeah.
Right.
But we do not attack these centers of supply, in spite of the fact that from the classical point of view, they are legitimate military targets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that came up in Holland, obviously, is that people were afraid that the port of Rotterdam, which is basically a hub for all the military equipment from the U.S., would come under attack at some point, and I was like,
Yeah,
okay.
I really hope that it will not happen, you know. Yeah, because that's not our desire,
Right.
and our plan, you know.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
if the war really, if the war becomes, then certainly all the red lines will just
Yeah.
go away. Yeah.
We're now a few years in, and I see a constant escalation. I don't see any de-escalation. We go from not allowing ground troops to allowing ground troops, not allowing certain types of weaponry to allowing certain types of weaponry. We now have Dutch F-16s, which were gifted to Ukraine, actually flying sorties over Russian territory. And I'm like, okay, aren't we moving in the wrong direction? Do you feel diplomacy has failed here, or do you still think that diplomacy can play a role?
You know, for the time being, there is no diplomacy.
Right.
No, there is no any diplomatic exchanges. There are no contacts, as I mentioned. There are no any attempts to find a solution. Yeah, what we hear from Brussels, from NATO, that Russia must be defeated. That's the only slogan. Yeah, we cannot allow Russia to win.
Right.
Yeah, it must be defeated. It must be defeated. Now, these were the slogans certainly more popular in the beginning of the operation. Now, since it's evident to anyone that Ukraine is losing, there is one more slogan. Okay, let's stop.
Mm-hmm.
Let's proclaim a ceasefire.
Right.
What does the ceasefire mean? That there is just, yes, a pause in the hostilities that will allow Ukraine to rebuild its forces, to rearm, to restore all these supply chains, and then to start again.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we are not prepared to agree. Yes, we are absolutely prepared and we want peaceful solution. But, peaceful solution that is based on legal agreements, on a binding agreements.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to fall for the same thing you fell for in the 1990s, where verbal agreements were basically given and nothing was put to paper. And then NATO expanded after all.
Yeah.
If you look at the whole situation right now, do you think the position of Russia towards Europe and the US has changed because of this whole conflict? Do you think it's going to take a long time for trust to be rebuilt, for example?
Frankly speaking, yes.
Yeah.
I think now the level of mistrust is so deep. At least I'm speaking now for us. Just we are absolutely just quite disillusioned by the position of the West. It will take time to restore confidence, to restore dialogue, or at least dialogue maybe started immediately with the aim to restore confidence, at least to try to restore confidence.
I'm actually surprised you just mentioned that there has been no dialogue with the Dutch government whatsoever.
No.
I was expecting that the Dutch government would be talking to you on a regular basis.
No, absolutely no. Okay. They are not interested in my opinion,
Yeah. So, realistically, how do you think this war is going to end?
Well, sooner or later it will end by a solution, by a political solution, even certainly on the basis of the realities on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
That is becoming more and more difficult for Ukraine. But sooner or later there will be just a solution, and hopefully it will be a solution that will at least just ensure the political settlement that is seen as satisfactory to both sides.
Right. What would Russia see as a successful outcome? Not ideally, but realistically, what would you think is?
Well, we I think already named these these conditions. This is the recognition of the territorial realities, non-adherence to NATO and non-aligned status.
Right.
We are not, by the way, we are not against joining European Union.
Right.
If European Union wants this vast, impoverished country with enormous corruption and high level of criminality to be a member, okay, we are not against it. Yeah, but what we, for us, a credible solution is where we see that our security is being respected.
Right.
That's what.
Yeah.
There might be different modalities, you know. I am not now predicting the exact
Is
framework.
Is there anything that's non-negotiable? Anything you don't want to give up from a Russian perspective?
Yeah, the territories
Right.
that are according to constitution,
Right.
the parts of the Russian Federation, and certainly neutral status of Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah, these are two conditions. Yeah.
Yeah. If you look back, if you look back at the start of this whole conflict, do you feel differently about it now than when it started? For example, I can imagine that when it started, you might have thought that it could have been over in a few weeks. But
Well, yes, I think we initially we saw it as a more swift operation,
Right.
as we see from now. Yes, maybe we didn't take into consideration certain aspects that are important. But anyway, you know, it was not our choice.
Mhm.
It was not. We didn't want it, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me end on a more personal note. Are there debates among Russians about how this conflict should end? Is this actually a debate that's going on in Russian society? Are people talking about the whole situation, how they would like to see it end?
I think the majority of the population would like to see Ukraine as our neighbor, as our good neighbor, but not being a hostile state, not being an anti-Russia, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, to restore these historic ties that have always been between us, you know.
Right.
What we have, for instance, with other former Soviet republics like Belarus, like Kazakhstan. Yes, they are independent. They pursue their own foreign policy. They have good relations,
Right.
more or less with the Western countries. Kazakhstan, for instance, have very good relations with Europe, but we have also friendly relations with them. That's what we want with Ukraine, you know, not to be anti-Russia.
Right.
We cannot afford
Yeah.
to have at our southern border aggressive, hostile, anti-Russian society.
Right.
You know, that's what we cannot afford.
Yeah.
By all means.
Yeah. Do you think we can see a resolution of this conflict within the next year or so, or could this perhaps drag out much longer?
Frankly speaking, I am not very optimistic about this year,
Right.
the current year. Maybe next year. But you know, just all these predictions is a bit a dangerous thing. You know.
Yeah.
Let's see how the situation develops. You know.
Yeah.
Now, so many unexpected events in the world that come quite of a sudden and affect the geopolitical situation worldwide.
Yeah.
For instance, maybe a month ago we couldn't imagine what's happening now in the Middle East. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people speculated about why it might happen. Obviously, President Trump already said, "Okay, I'm going to help you guys." But then nothing happened for a month, and everybody's like, okay, maybe he didn't mean it that way. And then two carrier groups moved into the Persian Gulf, and then I think everybody knew, okay, this is something is going to happen. Yeah. I have one last question for you. If you could speak directly to the Dutch people, could you maybe address the feelings of fear or anger they have towards Russia? Do they need to be afraid?
Well, first of all, you know, I would probably say to the ordinary Dutch people that we are not your enemy. Russia is not an enemy of the Netherlands by no way, you know. We
Right.
didn't have, by the way, we didn't have any difficult periods in our history, of our relations.
Yeah.
We always have good relations, Russian Empire played a very significant and constructive role in the establishment of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the beginning of the 19th century, the present-day kingdom, that is still here. Our Princess Anna Pavlovna was a queen of the Netherlands, and she is respected here. Yeah, we were never at war with the Netherlands. We didn't have any difficult pages in our history. So now we are situated in different parts of Europe,
Right.
Yeah, we had until recently. We had, by the way, extremely advantageous economic relations.
Yeah.
Extremely, Netherlands was the biggest trade partner of Russia in Europe, bigger than Germany, bigger than France.
I remember a lot of Dutch flowers actually being shipped to Russia.
Dutch flowers, were there. Now certainly there are flowers from other countries, and this market is already occupied. So, we are not your enemies. We do not have any aggressive plans against the Netherlands. Absolutely,
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, we want to be good. You might not love us, but you should not afraid of us. Be afraid of us.
Okay, thank you. Ambassador, thank you for your time and engaging with these questions so
Thank you
openly.
very much. Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers for watching this episode.
Thank you.